Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome once again to grecochess, a YouTube channel of chess, where we discuss all aspects of the game of chess. In the previous video, if you've watched it, I was facing the chessbot Xavier from Spain, whose rating is 1900, 1900, and I was having the black pieces. With the white pieces, after one loss, I defeated Xavier the second time, but with the black pieces, I lost 7 times in a row and I gave up. I stopped the video and I was even thinking to end the series of facing the bots. But as I was preparing my suitcases for Atlantic City for the Atlantic City Open tournament that starts in a few hours, I said, why not? Took a break and went on my phone and faced once again Xavier for the eighth time, and the first that is not shown live, having the black pieces. And let's see what happened. The game took place about a couple of hours ago, and I'm going to share with you what happened. And let's share the screen first of all. And this time I'm going to show only part of the screen because I don't want to spoil the surprise. I don't want to spoil what happened. Otherwise, you can see quite a lot of moves ahead of where we are, and also you can see a diagram that shows how the difference between the two of us went. Once again, if you see positive number, it means that white is doing better. Negative number means that black is doing better. A green arrow will show the best possible move. And the numbers will show, by the way, on here on this left part, if it is positive. I mean, if it is at the top, the number, it means that white is doing better. The bottom means that black is doing better. And I have the black pieces. Xavier has the white pieces. Xavier has a nominal rating of 1900. And my rating depends whom you ask. According to the United States Chess Federation, after my recent QCC Winter Swiss tournament was raised to 1706, but this will only show in April. So for March, I'm still with 1656. And if you ask chess.com, depending on the time control. But let's start the game. Xavier is starting. And Xavier starts with a e-pawn. And this time I play the French defense. Knight f3. Usually the second move in the French is pawn to d4. But also knight f3 is, I would say, the second most popular move. But also a book move. You see the little book. This is a comment on the moves. If you see books, it means opening theory, and later on there are going to be anything from 2 exclamation marks, meaning brilliant, 1 exclamation mark means it is great. A star means that it's the best possible move. A thumbs up means that it's an excellent move. A checkpoint means it's good move. Question mark followed by exclamation mark means it is inaccuracy. Question mark is a mistake and 2 question marks are a blunder. And let's see how game continues. Still I'm in the book move. We exchange on d5, still book theory. And now we leave theory. Bishop to b5 check. You may remember that Xavier had played the similar move in the previous ones that I was videotaped them while I was playing them a few hours ago, and I had said that this should not be a good move because I reply with my pawn to c6. I'm blocking the bishop has to move out again, and I'm also strengthening the control of the center. This is not a theory move, it is just a good move, and in the language of the uh, computer review, good means not good, let's put it this way. So you see that I already start having an advantage of 0.1. And of course, I place my pawn to c6. You see the star, the best possible move. And Xavier decides to postpone having to save the bishop on b5 with a check from e2. Of course, I cannot take the bishop. I need to reply the check. And the reply, again, a good move. This check mark means not that good. The wrong bishop. Computer would rather have my bishop to e7. I didn't play it because I wanted my knight on g8 to have options to go whether to f6 or e7. If I placed my bishop here, I would have deprived the knight of one of the two options. We finished 5 moves, and what is the score? I'm leading by 0.2. And now Xavier must save the bishop and sends it to d3. By doing so, it's the best move, but this blocks the pawn on d2. If that is your best move, this doesn't say too many good things about you. My knight f6 develop, although computer would rather have the queen, but usually you don't want to develop your queen early. That's where I place my knight, but computer thinks it's inaccuracy. And now Xavier has the advantage, even though it's just 0.1. Knight goes to d4 for Xavier. Queen goes to e7, computer thinks the best. And knight takes my bishop. And I reply with the queen. While with the queen, to pin Xavier's queen. I want the queens to go out, otherwise my queen would be in a bad shape, and Xavier might have the chance to place his queen in a better square. Computer thinks it is an excellent move, not the best. The best would have been to take back with a pawn. I don't want to use my f-pawn, opens the diagonal from h5 to e8, even though currently my knight is on f6, but if for any reason this knight goes away, you would have a queen going here, a bishop going there. Better avoid it while I can. That was the reason of my choice. Kingside castling, short castling for Xavier. And I change the queens because now look at that. My queen is pinned, but not Xavier's queen. So I don't want any disasters. I don't want any rook to suddenly appear on e1 and the queen away. So let's exchange now. Computer thinks it's just a good move. Bishop takes back, of course, no other choice. Otherwise, Xavier is down by a queen. And my bishop goes to d6. Let's develop my bishop. 10 moves have been completed. Xavier is ahead by 0.1. You see the 0.1 here. And you see the green arrow means it is the best possible move. Of course, if you see the star, they coincide, best moves. Otherwise, it means that the player has not played the best, and the green arrow will show which move would have been the best. Let's continue. Pawn to d4 for Xavier, of course. Pawn in the center. Castling for me. Short castling, that is. Bishop to e3 develops also the bishop. And my knight is also developed to d7. My knight from b8, because also the knight from f6 can go there. That's why if one keeps a notation, one needs to make clear which one it is. Knight to c3. And Xavier also develops the other knight, his knight. My rook to e8. My rook is in the open file, e file. Why do I call it open? No pawns there. Pawn to g3 for Xavier. And my bishop goes to b4 and attacks the knight on c3. Of course, there's a pawn on b2 to take. If we do the exchange, Xavier has the two bishops, but has ruined his pawn structure. Xavier places the rook on e1. Computer would rather have the knight go back all the way to b1. You don't want to place your pieces back, but maybe that would have been better than the alternative, because at least by doing so, Xavier would not have ruined the pawn structure. Now, in addition to Xavier having issue with the pawn structure, if we exchange, there's another issue. The knight on c3 now is pinned because there is a rook on e1. And that is why the computer places a question mark, meaning mistake. And I take advantage of that. My knight goes to e4. Great move to the computer. So if Xavier uses his knight at c3 to take my knight on e4, he loses his rook. And I'm ahead by an exchange. We finish 15 moves. I'm ahead by 1.0. Still, this does not decide the game, but not bad to have this advantage. So let's continue. Bishop to g4 for Xavier, and he's threatening my knight on d7. If I'm not careful and I decide to take his knight on c3, he can take my knight on d7 because it's attacking completely unprotected. But if one spots this threat and doesn't react hastily, like fortunately I did this time, I'm not always that careful. I wish I was always that careful. My knight now goes to f6, and now not only I save the knight, but also the bishop on g4 is attacked. So look at the threats that Xavier is facing. His knight on g4, which is unprotected, meaning if he does nothing, for example, if he moves any of his rooks, I win a bishop for free. If he saves it, then take knight, pawn takes back, I win at least a pawn, I'm attacking the rooks. And Xavier decides to save the bishop and also attack my other knight on e4. Computer thinks this is a blunder, and you see suddenly from being ahead by only 1.1, now I'm ahead by 3.6. You see the 3.6 here. This is significant. Still not 100% deciding the game, but quite a large advantage. And what do I do now? The moves are obvious, even though the computer thinks they are great. Computer will give me two great moves for another. I take the knight. And now if pawn took back, because this is what I was expecting, then my bishop goes to c3 and attacks both rooks. And if any of them moves, they win the other, so I win a pawn plus an exchange. But Xavier decided to surprise me with a pawn to a3. What do I do now? I'm in danger of losing my bishop. If I try to save my knight, I lose the bishop. If I try to save the bishop, I may lose the knight. What do? Bishop goes to a5. Second great move in a row. You see the exclamation point. Now Xavier will take the knight, and I'm going to win the pawn. I already got an extra pawn, and I'm attacking the two rooks, rook on a1 and rook on e1. So Xavier can only save one of them. What does Xavier do? He decides to save none of them. Pawn to h3. Myself, a little bit hasty maybe, but I said let's win the rook now that we can, so I don't fall for any trick and the rook suddenly see themselves. How could this happen if any of the rooks could go somewhere where it's also threatening something of mine? For example, the rook of a1 go to b1. Then if I take the rook here, rook can go to b7 and who knows what. Still, I don't think anything could come out of that, but better save that, sorry, better win the rook. And which of the two rooks? I want once exchange over to have the rook at the corner blocked by a pawn and not at the center. That's why I take the rook on a1, so the rook from e1. The computer would rather have my knight go to e4. I'm not sure why. So Xavier takes it, and after 20 moves, I'm ahead by 3.7, as you see here. This is the 21st move, Xavier. My knight goes to e4 now. If Xavier wants to exchange, wonderful, I'm ahead in material. If he doesn't want to exchange, my knight is in a very strong and powerful square. It's not exactly an outpost because the f-pawn may be pushed and attack the knight, but if this happens, after my knight goes away, the bishop is threatened. It's a strong square. Technically, it's not an outpost because outpost is only when you can be guaranteed that there are no neighboring pawns that can attack the knight. Either they have been removed from the board or they're ahead of the knight, or at least parallel to the knight. Well, that's the best I could get. Rook to b1 attacking my pawn on b7, and I don't want to give the pawn, even though still I would think I would be ahead. But once again, better safe than sorry. Pawn goes to b6. Computer doesn't like it. Rather have my knight go to d6 because both it protects the pawn and threatens the bishop on f5. But what if this bishop would land on f4 at some point and attack the knight? The problem here is that Xavier played the move that I was expecting to play. What can we do? Bishop to d7, and I lost a pawn. Because my rook from e8, where can it go? It cannot go neither e6 nor c8 to protect the pawn, and therefore the pawn is lost. What can I do? Rook goes to a d8, attacks the rook, attacks the bishop. Bishop takes my pawn. At least it's only one pawn, cannot take the other on d5 because I have my rook. But I must save the other rook on a8, and the same to c8 at the same time, attacking the bishop on c6. Bishop goes to b7, attacks my rook, and now my rook can take the pawn on c2. What move would the computer prefer to attack the bishop again? I think it's redundant. But after 25 moves, what's the score? I'm ahead by 3.8. Materially, I have +3 as you see here, an exchange plus a pawn. And let's see how the game will continue. Rook to e1 for Xavier. Rook to c3 for me, attacking the pawn on a3. Rook goes to a1, protects it, and my pawn goes to h6 now. Why? Oh, I had the chance to win a pawn. Look at that. Computer shows it. Had I taken the pawn, if pawn takes back, I win the bishop. And I win a pawn like that. That's what the computer thinks the best. But to h6, not a bad idea, because since I'm ahead in material, I must be able to avoid nasty surprises. And one of the nasty surprises could be a back rank mate. Still, Xavier doesn't have a rook that can go to the 8th rank, and I have my rook on d8, but better be ready. King to g2, and I don't have the chance to win the pawn on g3 any longer. My knight goes to d6, and I am attacking the bishop. Bishop to a6, defends itself. My knight goes to 5 and threatens the bishop on e3. I'm ahead. In fact, if I take it, I also even win an extra pawn, but even without that, being ahead, I want to win material. Bishop goes to d2, attacks my rook, and my rook goes to c2, attacks the bishop. Bishop to d3 for Xavier, and this way, both my rook and my knight are attacked, double attacked by the bishop, but under different conditions, I would have lost material, but fortunately, I can take the bishop on d2, and Xavier would take my knight on f5. So now again, no lose material, but now we win the pawn on d4. So my advantage becomes even larger, and exchange +2 pawns for a total of +4. What do I need to be careful? Oh, back rank could come when I least expect, because yes, I gave Luft my king the h7 square, but look at the bishop on f5 controls h7. So if the rook on d8 leaves the 8th rank and Xavier can send the rook on the 8th rank, it could be made. And rook sends his rook on e1. So the rook can go to e8. If now I move my rook from d8 goes to d7 or d6, it's one move checkmate. It doesn't matter that I'm ahead by 4.9 as you see here. All I need is one careless move, and I lost on the spot. Fortunately, that did not happen. My rook goes to a4 and attacks the pawn on a3. And Xavier decides to attack my rook, but my rook is going to move exactly where it wanted to go and wins the pawn on a3. My advantage becomes even larger. You see the +5, meaning an exchange +3 pawns. Look at my pawns A, B, D. Passed pawns, and two of them are connected passed pawns. Yes, they're still in the beginning. They have not advanced too much, but with so few pieces, they have lots of potential. Rook goes to e7 and attacks what? Supposedly the pawns on a7 and f7, but the f7 is protected. My king, the a7 by my rook. But I want to start advancing. The pawn goes to a5. Can Xavier win my b7? What I would do if I was human playing white, I would put the rook here. So if Xavier decides to save the rook by save the b6 pawn by sending my rook to d6, checkmate in 2 moves. I was scared of that. Of course, I was not going to let Xavier checkmate me, but I was going to lose the pawn and while losing. Xavier, however, did not set this trap. You have to think of the traps before they are set. So if they are set or when they are set, you are ready. Bishop goes to f5. My pawn goes to g6, attacks the bishop. Now, no sad checkmate option any longer because my king has both of the g7 square. If there's a check, first of all, the bishop does not cover h7 any longer, and even if it did, my king can go to g7. So this remote option of a sudden checkmate does not exist any longer. Bishop goes to g4, my pawn goes to h5. And the bishop has to move again. I'm pushing my pawns while attacking the bishop. Bishop goes to e2. Then my rook goes to b8, and now I am protecting the pawn on b6. I need now to push my pawns as far away as possible, and ideally the A and B, because they're connected pawns, in addition to the rook protection, they can also protect each other. Bishop goes to b5 for Xavier. That basically blocks my b6 pawn, cannot move. My rook goes to b3, attacks the bishop. Bishop goes to a4, and rook to b4. So bishop cannot yet, it cannot block my pawns. If it tries to go back to b5, it's lost. In fact, Xavier needs to think what to do with his bishop, and he sends it to a8. A nice case because I have the two pieces, the rook and the bishop, attacking my pawn on f7. If Xavier could play again and check here, my king would go to f8 and attacks both of them. Or if the rook goes here, well, what can I do? I don't like this thing. Most likely I'm going to lose a pawn, but I'm so much ahead that should not change the result. But what should I do instead? Forget about everything else and push my pawn to a4. Push my pawns. Passed pawns need to be pushed as fast as possible. Xavier will take my pawn on f7 check. King goes to f8, and now Xavier would like to win another pawn here, but unfortunately for him, if he does so, he loses his rook. That is why he sends his rook on a7. Now time for me to send my pawn to d4, because before it was attacked by the bishop. Xavier will take with my g6 pawn, and now his f pawn is passed pawn, and also cannot push the d pawn any longer. What should I do? First of all, push the pawn from b6 to b5, and by doing so, the a5 pawn is protected, and I can move my rook. My rook doesn't need to get stuck on b4 any longer. But Xavier will win one more pawn, and look at that. Things are not going well at all, because Xavier has three connected pawns and pass pawns, a triad, one pawn island FGH. I also have three, but the only two are connected to each other. I have two pawn islands. Yes, I have rook versus bishop. Yes, my pawns are a little bit further, but it doesn't seem that the win is guaranteed. I send my rook to b2 to accelerate the pass, although computer would rather have the d pawn go to d3, but the rook can go to d7 and attack. And look what's happening now. We finished 45 moves. I'm ahead by 3.1, a little bit less than before. Before I had exceeded 4 and even 5 perhaps at some point. Bishop goes to g6. Want to stop my d pawn from advancing. My rook goes to b3. Why? So that I can send the pawn from a4 to a3. Computer doesn't like it. Inaccuracy. It says it would rather have my rook go to b6 and threaten the bishop. Rook goes to d7, attacking the d pawn. And forget about d pawn. My a pawn goes to a3. In fact, the bishop, neither the bishop nor the rook can control the a2 and a1 squares. So let Xavier win the d4 pawn. And my pawn goes to a2. I'm near promotion. One more square. If I could play one more move, pawn goes to a1, promote. Which Xavier will not allow. Of course, rook goes to d1. And my rook cannot go to b1 to do the standard trick that one usually does, meaning either takes the rook or sorry. If rook goes here, if Xavier can do nothing and lose the rook, move the rook anywhere else and have my pawn promote. So if the rook goes, what can here we are. If Xavier moves the rook here, my pawn promotes. If Xavier decides to take my rook, my pawn takes a rook and promotes. But unfortunately for me, things are not so simple because of this bishop on g6. If I place my rook on b1, what Xavier is going to do is he's going to take my rook. And even if my pawn takes the bishop, rook will take it, and look how things are going. I'm doing very poorly because now I'll be even back in my tail, I'll be behind. But what I want to do is support the a2 pawn. Rook goes to a3, so one more move and pawn goes to a1. And even if Xavier takes it, then my rook takes rook and I'm winning. And Xavier will stop it by placing his rook on a1, so I cannot push the pawn from a2 to a1. What should I do? The a pawn went as far as possible, and now time to start pushing the b pawn. Fortunately, Xavier cannot place his bishop on f7 and have double attack on the a2 pawn, because then I would lose the pawn because of my king on f8. But first, let's push my post to b4. Obviously, I would rather have my king go to g7 and attack the bishop, but I want to push the b pawn as much as possible. Xavier places his bishop on e4. And look at that, computer thinks the best move for Xavier is to take my pawn and lose his rook. That's not what happened. I send my pawn to b3. But by the way, we finished now 50 moves. I'm ahead by 4.6. Although I have fewer pawns than Xavier, 2 versus 3, and although the material difference is quite small, meaning in exchange for a pawn, however, my pawns are near promotion. So pawn goes now to b3. Bishop goes to b1. And what do we do now? Because if I take the bishop, I can lose my rook. Yes, but then I have a queen. And now I'm going to exactly, but if Xavier, if I take here, if he takes here, I have a queen. If I take here and he takes my queen, then he lost a bishop. Then I have an extra rook, even though pawns are not doing so well. And that's what I did. I created a queen. Xavier will take it. My pawn goes to b2. Now I'm counting on the other pawn because otherwise, 2 pawns for a rook where the pawns are still in the beginning. If the pawns were more advanced, they could be an issue. So he decides to start attacking, pushing the pawns as far as possible. Why the h? Because the king is not blocking it as far away as possible. But fortunately for me, the pawns are still in the beginning. They have not even crossed the middle. Rook to a1. What should Xavier do? If he takes my rook, I have a queen and take his rook. If he moves his rook anywhere, for example, near the king, exchange. Let's do it again. If he goes, for example, to g1, change, and I promote. So Xavier did the least bad of a set of very bad options and takes my pawn on b2. I take win the rook and 55 moves, and I have 2 rooks versus 3 pawns. 5.2 is my advantage. Of course, the 3 pawns, if these pawns were on the 6th or 7th rank, things would be very difficult for me. But now I have quite a lot of moves to stop them, but I need to stop them, cannot afford to let them start advancing. King goes to f3, and rook goes to a2, and by doing so, I have already won the first of the 3 pawns, the f2 one. King to a4, I win d1. So only g and h pawns remain. King goes to d5. Xavier should have pushed a pawn. Still, I don't think he could have done anything, but at least he could have fought. Rook goes to e3 and attacks the pawn on g3. Pawn goes to g4, and rook to f4, and I'm winning one of the 2 pawns. Pawn to h5, and I win the g4 pawn. So at this point, I have 2 rooks versus a pawn. And the pawn cannot promote. If the pawn was on h7, it could promote to the check-in, then who knows? But not now. Even if it was on h6, it could not promote. would stop it on time. We finished 60 moves. What is the score? M6. When did the M started showing up after this move, Xavier, it is M7. Uh, um, if I play perfectly, I'm checkmating in 7 moves. Notice M6. Pawn continues, hoping beyond hope that I'll fall asleep for 2 moves and let it promote. Rook goes to A5, making 5 moves now, M5. King goes to E6. Mate 4 now. King goes to D7. Now I win the pawn to avoid any surprises. Unfortunately, my king is broken, so I could not. I mean, if I place the rook on A7, king would go to the 8, but then the rook could not go here. Now win the pawn, making 3 moves. Just make sure no stalemate. King goes to D8. My rook goes to H7, so the king has only one legal move to go to C8. You see this little arrow pointing the right means the only move. And now my rook goes to A8 and I win. And believe it or not, after 7 devastating losses when I was videotaping my games, now that I didn't videotape any longer and I played for the fun of it, I won. I defeated Xavier. We'll go now to the other screen to see what does the computer think about the game. And I'm at the wrong screen. I need to show the other screen. Here is the complete analysis. According to the computer, Xavier played with an accuracy of 84.9%. I had 92%. And Xavier played as if his rating was 2,100, above his 1,900. I played as if my rating was 2,400, as if I was an international master one step away from a grandmaster. Of course, this is very flattering. I don't need this flattering. Let's see the various categories. No brilliances. I had 3 great moves. Xavier had none. 3 book moves each of us. Best 25 versus 15 for me. Excellent 31 versus 26 for Xavier. Good 9 versus 6 for Xavier. And in the negatives, I only had 2 inaccuracies, no mistakes, misses, or blunders, while Xavier had 3 inaccuracies, 1 mistake, and 1 blunder. And that was it. So I consider that I have eliminated, I've gone through Xavier. I'm very happy about that because I was so much frustrated after the 7 losses. I was feeling that the series would be over, but the series is not over. Who is next in the list? You see from the advance, we have already survived or gone through 14 out of the 20. The next one is Olga from the Ukraine, the last of the 1900 bots. Let's see what Olga can do. Olga, this is Cyrillic alphabet. I think it means hello for hello. Unfortunately, I don't know that language. Ignore my first few moves, okay? Well, Olga, I hope that your first few moves are going to be, let's say, less than optimal, but until it's time for me to face you, we have the Atlantic City Open. I'm going to show it once again. I had shown it before. One moment to go to the appropriate page. Starts in a few hours in Atlantic City, New Jersey. And now I can share the screen with you. And here we are. They call it a new event because It replaces these two events, the Princeton Open and the Open at Oxford. And about the Princeton Open, let me share a memory I have with you. I was playing in a game that in the ending, I was 4 points down. It was completely hopeless, but I persisted. The game went to 100 moves, 6 hours. All of the games had finished, everybody watching our game, and I was able to pull off a miracle and get a draw, 100 moves. I'm participating in a 4-day schedule. The time control you see here is 40 moves in 80 minutes. After that, sudden death, meaning the time you get after your 40 moves, if you can do them in less than 80 minutes, another 30 minutes. And there is a delay of 30 seconds, meaning when it's your turn to play. For the first 30 seconds, the clock does not move. And this means that the games can go very long. Let's see how long. Every player will have at most 110 minutes, and 2 is 230. And if the game goes, let's say, to 120 moves, you have to add another 120 minutes, which means 350. They can go to 6 hours, perhaps. My category is the under 1800. Let's see what I'm going to do there. Once I'm back, assuming I play in the tournament, uh, and I don't lose the score sheets, I'm going to go through these games. I'll try, if possible, from my hotel at Atlantic City to start covering the games. If not, because the schedule is very heavy and I may not find the time. If I don't find the time, I'll do it once I'm back. This is next online, and also in the Queen's Chess Club tournament in the second round this Friday. I'm taking a bye because I'll be in Atlantic City. Um, this I'm going to, of course, show the next games I'm going to play there. And once these are completed, then it's time for Olga. Unless, meaning in the chessboard, unless we have developments in the tournaments. If the Underwater Moonlight goes the final round, because we are one game away from completing the semi-final round, then I'm going to cover the final games as they end, once they end. But that's it for now. Thanks to all of you for the viewers, subscribers, the comments and the likes. If you like, you may want to share with me your comments. Have you faced the boss? How well have you done? Which are the highest bots you have been able to defeat? If you've tipped any of the games, you can send me the links and I'll be glad to show these games in my channel. And if you have not subscribed, you may want to consider subscribing. But that's all for now. Thanks once again. This is Greco Chess. I'm your host, Harry Lausaniziris. Ladies and gentlemen, goodbye.